Look me in my eyes and try to feel my pain. Do you know how it feels to be left out in the rain? Each and every day there's someone judging me. Worry about my life and how I live in these streets. Every day I wake up, got 100 different haters. Trying to get this paper, stack stiff like elevators. But no one really wants to hear my story. That's why I'm all alone, there's no one here for me.
I'm Melea VanOstrand, and this is my story about being transracially adopted by a white family into a predominantly white community.
Melea came to us as a direct result of my being a family and adoption attorney. I had placed an ad for a couple who wanted to adopt a child. A mother answered that ad who had already given birth to Melea. At that time, we didn't know her name, but Melea came to me first so that I could begin the process of filing the petition for adoption with the necessary court. The parents whom I had originally contracted with decided against the adoption of a child here and went forward with a foreign adoption. So this child was already with us. Melea was there. She was a part of our family. And her father and I eventually, after only 6 to 8 weeks, decided that we were the best parents she could have. So we began adoption proceedings ourselves. We were a white couple. He had German, Dutch, and I an Irish descent. The Association of Black Social Workers objected to our transracial adoption, but the court granted it nonetheless because no other couple of the black community came forward, even after our attempts to find one, and asked her to be placed with them. So after the 6-month waiting period, she became our adoptive daughter, who happens to be adopted.
Growing up, the biggest issue was sticking out. Growing up, you want to look like your parents, you want to be like the rest of your peers, have normal families. So when you tell people you're adopted, it's like saying you're different.
Throughout the years, it was a special challenge and joy for us to find ways to make sure she was comfortable, not only as a black child being raised by whites, but as a black child, period. She remembers to this day that her little nursery books and fairy tale stories had black or brown faces. She didn't know until she was grown that I had taken an artist's pencil and changed Cinderella and a couple of her other characters in Sleeping Beauty and Peter Pan and various other books into children of color.
I was always the only one in the family who had brown skin, curly hair. I was just different, but I didn't really mind it too much. But I didn't like the fact that I couldn't really identify with anyone, so I sort of felt lost.
I know there are stares. There are people who wonder. There have been people who have wondered, do I have a black husband? Does she have a black father? Have we had an interracial relationship? It was an issue that at an early time in our parenting, her father thought we should immediately tell people if the two of us were not there. If he was someplace with her alone, or I was someplace with her alone, we should jump right in and say, oh, by the way, my spouse is white, I didn't marry a black man, or I didn't marry a black woman, and I didn't feel that way about it. People would stare, people would ask, a few people would openly be critical. I had one woman in the supermarket who saw her with me when she was only 2.5 years old, and said, aren't you ashamed of having sex with a black man? And I turned to her and said, I will never be ashamed of my daughter. Didn't set her straight, because that would demean who Melea is. If people are embarrassed or aghast or uncomfortable with our family unit, it is their problem to deal with. It is not mine, and it is not Melea's.
Even though ignorance was a struggle growing up, it never stopped me from giving up on my self-worth and identity. My whole life, I always imagined who my birth mother would be. I always wanted to find her. I wanted to know if I had her eyes, if I had her hair, if I had, if we had any similarities. So I would constantly be Google searching Facebook, lots of databases, and I never did find anything. I didn't know her name. So I couldn't search her that way, but I would try to look at people's faces, but I never ever found anything.
It was difficult for me. It was exciting for Melea, but it was difficult for me. I had many fears that I talked over with her, most of which she dismissed, frankly, I thought rather too casually. But from her perspective, there wasn't anything for me to fear. In retrospect, I know that there was not, but it also was very understandable that I had them at the time. I was fearful that she'd choose her birth parents over me because they were more like her. I was fearful that she would become critical of things that I did that she saw their family doing altogether differently.
One day my mom walked in and said she found my birth mother's name, so I immediately Google searched her, and I didn't find her, but I found the name of her husband, so I messaged him on Facebook, and he turned out to be my birth father. September 18th, 2010, we met for the first time, and I was able to meet my siblings, my grandparents, and my parents. Turns out that we had a lot of similarities. I had my father's smile and eyes, my mother's hands and hair, and I even found out my ethnicity. My birth mom is Native American, Blackfoot, and Sioux, and my birth father is Black.
I've asked myself how things look to her, and I can't go inside her head, but just by the verbal and nonverbal cues that she gives me, it's clear that she has always felt a certain level of confidence that's sometimes difficult for children of color to feel unless they have been raised in a more integrated way. She's always gone to integrated schools. She's had friends from all walks of life and all ethnicities. She's had boyfriends of all ethnicities. I still wonder who the man she will marry or have a permanent partnership will be. And she feels comfortable considering that to be a white person, Taiwanese, an Asian, an Indian. When she was young, she had crushes on Indian boys. A black gentleman, an interracial fellow. She feels, I perceive, she feels much more free and open to have relationships, not only romantic relationships, but social relationships with people of all faiths and all ethnicities, because that's how she grew up. She had no trouble whatsoever relating to the Black experience. I was concerned that she would, but she did not. She was exposed at an early age to my experience with the Civil Rights Movement, to films and narratives and books about the Black history of the United States and of the world, so that she appears to be comfortable with that. How does that differ from a child who's raised by a Black family? I don't think it's necessarily different if that Black family has also taken the time and effort to expose that child to something more than a limited, narrow experience, and has inculcated in that child respect for all races and all faiths.
Meeting my birth family was a big turning point in my life. It was one of the happiest days of my life. Like, I know who I am as a person now, and I have two great families that I can share like life experiences with. So it's something I'm really glad I met my birth family, and it brought me and my mom closer.
Melea changed this family as a result of being the only Black in the family. There was not a hint of bigotism, consciously, in any of the immediate family. But certainly my birth great aunts and great uncles, and even a few of my late husband's extended family, were more than a little incredulous. But when you have a child who is so engaging and loving as Melea was, it's hard for a family to reject that child, regardless of the color of her skin or her ethnicity. It is a way of expanding the family, is the way I think of it. I think the change is just the increased sensitivity to the needs of the Black community that Melea has brought to the entire family unit. We're more aware of poverty, of homelessness, of good quality schools not being available for children who live in impoverished zip codes in Center Township, in Washington, D.C. And those are good issues for all of us to be much more aware of and to work actively to do something about.